When a company gets sold, what do you think its biggest asset is? The buildings? All the inventory in the warehouse? Well, you might be surprised to hear that for most businesses today, it's none of that stuff. The real value, it's often in things you can't even see or touch. So how on earth do you put a price tag on the invisible? Let's dive in. Get this. According to research from Johanny and Associates, in a typical company sale, a wild 80%, sometimes even more, of the value isn't physical at all. Nope, it's in the intangibles. Things like the brand name, customer loyalty, that secret sauce technology. I mean, that one statistic completely changes the entire game of how we value a business. So that leads to the big question, right? If most of the value is invisible, how do you measure it? Well, it's not just guesswork or throwing a dart at a board. It's actually a really methodical process with huge strategic implications, and we're going to break down exactly how it works. Okay, so first things first, we've got to get our definition straight. What exactly is an intangible asset? And this is a really important distinction because we need to separate what's a genuinely valuable, invisible resource from what's just, imaginary. So the official accounting definition gives us three key things to look for. One, it can't have a physical form. You can't stub your toe on it. Two, the company has to actually control it. And three, and this is the big one, it has to be something that's going to generate real money down the road, either by boosting revenue or by cutting costs. And just to be super clear, we're not talking about vague ideas like good vibes here. We're talking about very real, very valuable things. We're talking about trademarks, those coveted domain names, detailed customer lists, patented software, franchise agreements. I mean, any single one of these can be a massive engine for a company's success. All right, so we know these assets exist, but when you buy a whole company, how do you go about finding them all? How do you figure out what gets its own line item on the books, separate from that fuzzy catch-all category we call goodwill? Well, it turns out there's a specific two-part test for that. Accountants follow this really clear, logical path. First, they ask, does this thing even meet the basic definition of an asset that we just talked about? Then, and this is the critical step, they ask, is it identifiable? If the answer to both of those questions is yes, then it gets officially recognized as its own distinct intangible asset. So how does an asset prove it's identifiable? Well, it only has to pass one of two simple tests. The first one is the legal test. Does it come from a contract or some other legal right, like a patent? Easy enough. If not, it can pass this separation test. And that just means, could you, theoretically, sell or license this thing all by itself? The company doesn't actually have to plan on selling it, but if it's possible, then yep, it's identifiable. Okay, so we've found the assets. The next obvious question is, what are they worth? I mean, how in the world do you put a hard dollar value on something as abstract as a customer relationship or a trade secret? Well, valuators typically use one of three main methods. There's the market approach, which is kind of like checking Zillow. You look for similar assets that have sold recently. Kind of rare for unique intangibles, though. Then there's the cost approach, which asks, what would it cost to build this from scratch today? And finally, the income approach, which is the most popular, and it's all about forecasting the future cash flow that the asset is going to produce. And this is so important. While all three methods are valid, in the real world, the income approach is king. Why? Because it answers the one question every single buyer truly cares about. How much money is this specific thing going to make for me in the future? It's the most direct link between that invisible asset and the bottom line. Now, this is where things get really, really strategic. See, this isn't just a boring accounting exercise. How a buyer decides to carve up the purchase price between all these different assets can have a massive impact on their financial reports for years and years. This whole process has a name. It's called purchase price allocation, or PPA. Basically, the buyer has to account for every single dollar they spent, assigning it to different buckets: tangible assets, liabilities, the specific intangible assets we just found, and then whatever's left over gets tossed into that goodwill category. And this brings us to a huge strategic choice for the buyer. On one hand, they can take the easy route, put less value on specific intangibles, and just lump more money into goodwill. This actually makes their profits look higher in the short term because their annual expenses are lower. On the other hand, they can do the hard work of properly identifying and valuing every single intangible asset. Now, this means higher expenses and lower reported profits at first, but, and this is the genius of it gives them documented proof of exactly where the company's value is coming from. That is a massive advantage if they ever want to sell it later. And make no mistake, the stakes here are incredibly high. As Jahani and Associates put it, ignoring these assets is a mistake that can cost private equity firms millions or tens of millions of dollars. This isn't some minor detail. It's a huge strategic decision with very real and very large financial consequences. This whole process kind of forces us to zoom out and ask a much bigger question about what a business even is in today's economy. So think about it. If most of a company's real value isn't even on its main financial statements, if it's all in the ideas, the relationships, the data, are our old school ways of measuring a business even relevant anymore? It kind of seems like the true worth of a modern company isn't what it owns, but what it knows. And that should change how we think about value altogether.